Why did I say that? What are they thinking about me? Why are they not texting me back? Do you think it's because of what I said about my views about that thing? Why am I so awkward? Have you ever come away from a social event, some kind of friend gathering, work event, even an extended family gathering, and started going through everything that you said, picking it apart, pulling it apart, overanalyzing it, ruminating on it, and not able to let it go? If you have, this is what we are going to talk about today, and I'm going to teach you about why you're doing this, and then some steps to take to stop doing it. So you can go away from these social gatherings, from being around other humans, not replaying, second guessing, and scrutinizing everything you just said. Are you ready? But first, if you're new here, welcome to our little corner on the internet. Take a second, introduce yourself in the comment section below if you're back again. Always great to have you. If you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. The button's about right down there. Either way, I'm Kristina, registered clinical therapist, researcher, speaker, coach, and creator of my membership community, the Shift Society, that you can get more information about in the description. I help heart-centered humans break through the crap that is holding them back so that they can like themselves and their lives more every day. And going away from being with other humans and going and having your brain go like this over and over again is holding you back, or at least it's bringing you down, and it's not making the aftermath of any kind of social gathering all that enjoyable, and it's probably making you feel pretty awful. So why do we do this? Well, one reason is because of social anxiety. If you struggle with social anxiety, this is a really common foundational trait of social anxiety. The other thing is that you might be something called a high self-monitorer. Not easy to say, but someone who really monitors themselves highly. Like, this is different from having self-awareness. This is like self-awareness to the extreme, where you are always like watching yourself and not necessarily pointing out the things that you're doing well, monitoring yourself in order to pick out the things that you might be doing wrong. You're judging, you're replaying, you're observing, you're monitoring. You're almost like this really mean micromanager over your head, watching your every move, waiting for you to mess up so that you can come down hard on yourself. It could also be because you struggle with self-esteem, with your sense of self, with feeling really comfortable and confident in who you are. And so you go away second guessing yourself, thinking, I did something wrong. I wasn't as cool as I could have been. I wasn't as interesting as I should have been. What's wrong with me? Why can't I be more like this? So yeah, those ruminating thoughts that get stuck in our heads. And it's almost like, like rumination is when a cow ruminates their grass, brings it back into their mouth, and then starts chewing it on it again. And that is what we are doing when we ruminate. We're bringing those thoughts back up, and we keep, not literally, but very appropriately metaphorically, chewing on them, stewing on them, swirling them around, and sometimes for hours or maybe even days on end. The other part of this that makes it a tough pattern to break, especially if you don't really know how to break this pattern, which I'm going to teach you how to do in just a minute here, is because it kind of goes in this cycle and almost even becomes this self-fulfilling prophecy. So you go into some kind of social situation, you're feeling uncomfortable, you're feeling kind of awkward, maybe even you're feeling out of place, even if it's with friends or extended family or people that you know really well, but you kind of feel weird and awkward. And then you show up in a way that might seem a little bit weird or awkward, or at least you feel weird and awkward and then think you're being weird and awkward. And then you leave the social situation and you start thinking about all the things you said, how you said it, who you said it to, what you should have said, what you shouldn't have said, how you should have been, how you weren't, and just going through all of that rumination, which then makes you feel even more self-doubting, makes you feel even more anxious, makes you feel like pretty terrible after going into it. So then the next time you're anticipating going into some kind of social situation, you are very easily able to recall all of those feelings of dread, of awkwardness, of regret, of failure about who you thought or how you thought you should have been in that social situation. And then you go in feeling anxious and awkward again. And then it just starts to repeat itself. Now, we're going to talk in a minute here about why you are probably a lot more hard on yourself than anybody else is being. But there might be some times where you are showing up not as comfortably and confidently as you'd like to be. And maybe some of that hesitancy or a little bit of that awkwardness is showing through. So you might not be having these great, meaningful, connected, vibrant conversations that you want to be having because you are feeling uncomfortable. And because you're feeling uncomfortable, you're showing up in the conversation and maybe a little bit of an uncomfortable or withheld or just not super flowing kind of way, which then prevents you from having these great connections, meaningful conversations, vibrant interactions, which then continues to repeat that cycle. So you can see how it can be somewhat of a self-fulfilling prophecy as well. So why do we do this? What are some of the thought patterns and behavior patterns that we get stuck in that keep us in this overthinking, in this high self-monitoring, in this being really hard on ourselves or feeling really anxious when we're anticipating going into circumstances, gatherings, or groups, or even sometimes small get-togethers with close friends like this? The first reason that we get stuck here is because we get stuck in this cycle of emotional reasoning. So we go into these situations and we have the thought and the feeling, I'm awkward, I don't quite fit in, I'm not as interesting as everyone else, I don't have the social skills that everyone else has, so I feel uncomfortable, I feel insecure, I feel awkward. And so because I am having these feelings, then it means that it is true. It means that I am showing up weird or awkward or not as interesting or engaging or invested as I would like to be. And as we know, if you've been around here long enough, feelings are not always facts. And I want to tell you a little bit of a story where this kind of hit me square between the eyes. This was several years ago when I first started doing short mental health and mental wealth wellness talks on an app called Periscope. That was around several years ago, not around anymore. But I would go on and it was live stream, so that it was just like one shot and you're done. No redos, no editing, just show up, share, and done. And because of my anxiety that was showing up as perfectionism, every time I would finish a live stream, I would sit there and I would replay what I said and how I said it, and I would beat myself up for not making that point as well as I could have, saying that thing as great as I should have, and just feeling like I don't know what I'm doing, I am not good enough, I am so awkward, and that wasn't clear, and it didn't make sense, and such a terrible speaker, and what do I think I'm doing? And I would be so hard on myself and feel so terrible about myself afterwards. And then, even though I was dreading it and didn't want to do it at all, I started watching some of these live streams back so you could watch the recording afterwards, kind of like Facebook Live. And I forced myself to, even though I didn't want to relive all of that misery, and I started watching myself, especially after the ones where I thought I had totally dropped the ball and it was a terrible talk. And I remember watching it back and being like, this isn't so bad. Oh, that was actually a really good point. Oh, I actually explained that in a pretty good way. Oh, that thing that I thought that I went off about and got distracted by and didn't bring the point home the way I was wanting to, I kind of did. I'm not as terrible as I thought. And I remember thinking, if only those among us who have these thoughts that we are showing up not in these ideal ways, that we are not as interesting as we'd like to be, or that we are weird or awkward, or just not being the magnetic person that we think we should be, if you could follow yourself around with a video camera and then watch it back, I have a feeling that it would not be coming across on the outside nearly as dramatically as what's going on the inside. That you'd probably watch yourself and be like, oh, she's doing fine. He's doing fine. They're doing all right. It felt so uncomfortable on the inside, but is not showing up that way on the outside. So just remembering that just because you feel like something didn't go well, that you didn't show up in the best way, that you weren't as interesting or engaging or as comfortable or confident as you wanted to be, it doesn't mean that it's not showing up that way. It doesn't mean that it's as bad as you think it is. And it's probably, most likely, just fine. We also get ourselves stuck in this rumination when we go into awfulizing thoughts. When, again, we are judging ourselves too harshly, we are in a social event with some friends at a gathering, and we come away and we say things like, oh, that was so awful. I was so awkward. What I said was so terrible. How I showed up was just awful. And we get into this. It's not like, oh, I probably did okay, or oh, that wasn't my most shining moment, or oh, I may not have been as engaged and as interested or interesting as I would have liked to been at that point. We tell ourselves, I was awful. And because this person didn't seem riveted at everything I was saying, then it was an awful conversation. This came up for me more recently when I was at an event with a bunch of people and we were all sitting at the tables eating dinner, and I started talking with the woman behind me and we were kind of chatting, and then partway through the conversation, so we got interrupted. The server came or something, and then we didn't finish the conversation. She turned towards her friend and started talking towards her friend. Now, the old me would have been like, oh, I guess I'm not very interesting. Oh, I guess, I'm not magnetic enough for her to want to continue to have a conversation with, and I would have come down on myself. But instead, I took a step back, looked reasonably at the situation, and I realized that she is sitting with 6 of her best friends who she hasn't seen in months, if not years. They haven't been all together, and they're all together at this event and really wanting to enjoy being with each other. And probably at that point, she wasn't really interested in carrying on a 10-minute long conversation with a woman that she just met. And probably it had nothing to do with how interesting or how engaging I was, and just had to do with what she wanted to get out of that evening. And that is just fine. So instead of always turning against or on ourselves when things aren't going or people the way we want them to, or people aren't responding to us the way that we want them to, we don't have to make it mean something awful about us, about the situation, or even about the other person. We also get stuck in these cycles when we put on something that I like to call skepticals. These magnifying glasses that we think that other people are magnifying us in their field of vision, waiting and watching for us to mess up, waiting to pick us apart, putting on their skepticals and being skeptics with everything that we are saying or doing or how we're acting. And they're ready to pounce on that. And so we feel self-conscious, like don't say something weird, or make sure it doesn't come out this way, or, oh my gosh, you were such an idiot for saying that, or what must they be thinking about you now, or what if they took it like this? And we think that people are scrutinizing us with these skepticals. But the truth is, when it comes to monitoring ourselves, yes, we have magnifying glass. We definitely, in a lot of ways, especially if this is something we struggle with, we have these very poignant skepticals pointed on ourselves, as does anybody else. But when it comes to what they are looking through when they are seeing us, they're kind of looking through these like teeny tiny little glasses, just like these little magnifying glasses. They're not even magnifying. They're just like these little glasses that may even be a little bit scratched up and foggy. That when it comes to seeing ourselves, we are magnifying everything. But then when it comes to what other people are seeing in us, they are kind of not really noticing nearly as much as we think they are. Because when you think about it, when you are talking to someone, are you sitting there with these magnifying glasses on them, these skepticals on them trying to pick apart and poke apart and judge everything that is coming out of their mouths? Or are you more concerned about how you are coming across and think that they are probably doing just fine? So what if, and not what if, the truth is that is true for them as well. Caveat to this, if somebody is sitting there picking everything that you're saying or doing apart and they are criticizing it either in their heads overtly or behind your back, it has nothing to do with you. People only do stuff like this when they are feeling insecure in themselves and they are looking to put other people down in order to boost themselves up. So again, it has nothing to do with you and how you're doing, and says so much more about them and how they're doing. And how they're doing is not that well. If left unchecked, we can also get ourselves stuck in this rumination and overthinking after being in conversation with other humans by engaging in something called catastrophizing. So let's say, for argument's sake, you do say something that's a little bit awkward, maybe kind of gauche, or a misstep in the conversation. Maybe you accidentally do offend someone. Your brain automatically tells you that this is a catastrophe, that this is awful, that this is the worst thing that could have happened. But is it? Because most of the time, if we do say something that was off base, we can either repair it by apologizing for it and acknowledging it and making it better, or we can leave it and wait and see if the other person does address it and say, hey, I didn't like that. And then you can work it out and move through it together. But most of the time, people don't get themselves so wildly offended about little missteps in comments. Most people are just able to gloss it over and get over it and forget about it fairly quickly. But we are the ones sitting here and stewing in it and saying like, oh my gosh, that was so awful. And the reason why we do get so fearful of someone taking something we said the wrong way goes back to this primitive instinct that we need for our survival, or that we used to need for our survival in one way. We still need for our survival in another way, but we used to need to belong in order to survive life, in order to live. We couldn't piss off too many people in the tribe, or else we'd get kicked out of the tribe and left to fend for ourselves out in the wilderness, which would not go well. So it was a survival instinct to not upset people, to not be rude or abrasive or hurtful or mean, because they wouldn't keep us around if we were. So then our brain goes into, if there's anything that I say or do that could leave me open to rejection, it is awful. It is a catastrophe. I will die. But then we have to remind our brain and say, okay, getting rejected doesn't feel good. I like to get along with others. I like to have good relationships. I like to have peace in my relationships. But if someone decides that they don't like me or want to be friends with me or have any more conversations with me, it is not a catastrophe. It is not the worst thing in the world, and it won't end with my eternal demise. So reminding ourselves of that. Reminding ourselves in all of these different situations that just because I am feeling awkward or uncomfortable, it doesn't mean that that is how I'm coming across, or even that's how other people are perceiving me. If we are thinking that something that we said was absolutely awful, taking a step back and realizing that it probably was not as awful as we thought. We are always our own worst critic. Thinking also that people are scrutinizing us and looking at us with these skepticals and picking apart everything that we are doing. No, no, no. We are the only ones who are doing that to and towards ourselves. Other people are looking at us with kind of these little foggy glasses that don't see even super clearly because all of their focus is on themselves and what they are saying and how they are showing up. And also knowing that even if we do have an accidental misstep in a relationship or a conversation, that it is not a catastrophe, and most relationships have enough grace for the people in their lives to be imperfect. And if you think about that with your friends, if your friends say something that you know like was kind of a little insensitive or a little off base, or they said something that wasn't the kindest, you're not going to cut them off. You're probably going to have some grace and understanding. And if it was something that was bothering you that they said, you'll probably have a conversation. So again, not a catastrophe for them if they make a conversational misstep, not a catastrophe for you if you do the same. People like people who are authentic much more than they need people to be perfect. The people who matter the most want your authenticity. They don't want you stressed and anxious and overwhelmed with always trying to say the right thing and do the right thing and come across in the perfect way. Because when we are doing that, we are not being our authentic selves. We are keeping people at arm's length for that fear of judgment, because ultimately that comes down to our own judgments of ourselves. We fear our own self-criticism so much more than we fear anybody else's, because we are harder on ourselves than pretty much anybody else ever is. But letting yourself be real, letting people in, letting people get close to you, and letting yourself be imperfect. And even letting yourself be a little bit weird and awkward sometimes. I know for me personally, I love weird and awkward. If you want to be feeling more comfortable and confident in who you are, you can get my free guide. It's new, it's great, it's going to get you a head start on learning how to be your full and free self without apology. It's completely free in the description below, How to Be Yourself Without Apology. You're going to love it. Let me know what connected with you. Always love connecting with you about what connected with you in the comment section below. And it's always good to have you here. Until next time, take good care of yourselves. Take good care of those around you. Bye for now.